All right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How to Take Your Story to the United Nations, Next Steps in the UPR Process. I'm Yolande Tomlinson, the National Education Coordinator with the U.S. Human Rights Network. And as many of you know, the U.S. Human Rights Network is a national network of organizations and individuals who are working to strengthen and grow a people-centered human rights movement. And we're working to build a human rights culture where we center the experiences of those who are directly impacted by human rights violations. This webinar is hosted by not the ICCPR, but the UPR Task Force, which is an all-volunteer group of advocates who support members and partners engaging in the Universal Periodic Review process. As you know, the UPR is an opportunity for social justice organizations and individual activists to bring their human rights concerns and grievances with the U.S. government before a UN committee to demand change and accountability. Before we get into today's agenda, just a couple things to note. First is that the call is currently in lecture mode, so all attendees will be muted. If you wish to participate in the conversation during the Q&A session, we ask you to use the raise hand feature, which is accessible through the button at the top of your menu that reads Mode. Click, and it will have the option for you to use the raise hand feature. The second way for you to participate is by using the chat feature, which is on the left side of your screen. As you'll notice, you'll have the option to send questions directly to our presenters or to send a question to the audience. Throughout the conversation and the presentation, our presenters will be answering your questions there, but also at the end of the presentation as a whole. Today's call is also for an hour and a half. So this is from 1 p.m. Eastern to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. We will try to complete the content of the call within the first hour and to give you all who cannot stay for the full hour and a half some time to ask questions before the end of the hour. So with that, we'll get into the agenda. So the agenda for the call is an introduction to the UPR process, followed by a walkthrough of the one-page advocacy tool. Then we will have a presentation on how we plan to use the one-pager, and then a case study about how to effectively lobby during the UPR process, as well as another case study looking at the effectiveness of the process in supporting larger human rights organizing. And finally, we'll end with a call to action talking about ways that you can participate in the UPR process outside of that one-page advocacy document, and then Q&A session. And as I've mentioned, you can use the chat window on the left to ask questions as we proceed to the presentations. So first up, we have Tenjiwe McHarris. Tenjiwe has spent her entire political and professional career challenging the injustices that imprison people and their communities in a life of poverty or behind bars. That commitment has led her to campaign on human rights issues in the United States and around the world. She is currently the Human Rights at Home campaign director for the U.S. Human Rights Network. And Tenjiwe will lead us through an introduction to the UPR process. Tenjiwe?
Hi, Yolande. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to talk a little bit about the network, what we do, our work around the international mechanisms, and then go into UPR and why it's an important part of human rights work and how it could help advance campaigns on the ground. And so as Yolande said, the U.S. Human Rights Network does a number of things, but essentially two of the important aspects of our work is to hold the U.S. accountable for its human rights obligations, as well as to build the U.S. human rights movement in the United States. And how we do it is we engage, connect, and mobilize communities in diverse sectors across issue areas, constituencies, and regions to uphold and defend human rights and hold governments accountable. We build capacity and leadership of grassroots groups We raise the visibility of local human rights concerns and activism to shape the public discourse locally, nationally, and internationally. And we also facilitate effective collective action to secure the structural change needed to fully realize human rights. How we do it is we work through various member structures. Members and member leaders are the people and the entities that really carry the network's work forward. We see that through a number of structures, including the task force, and for example, the Universal Periodic Review Task Force that called for this webinar and is hosting this webinar. Again, we also work with organizations and individuals across issues. We're really an entity that brings together a diverse sector of people and groups to really help advance human rights in the United States. One of the most important areas of our work is coordinating and facilitating the participation in review processes for international mechanisms. This includes treaties that we've ratified, including the Convention Against Torture, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as the Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Another international mechanism is the Universal Periodic Review, which I'll get into now. Universal Periodic Review is a full review of the human rights record of all countries that are members of the United Nations. It takes place every 4 years and is a time where the U.S. is reviewed on its human rights record, whether we are meeting and whether or not we are meeting our human rights obligations, including economic, social, and cultural rights. This is an important time because we have not ratified the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and there's not as much of an extensive review of this during other reviews, like the review on the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So this is really an important opportunity for us to hold the U.S. accountable to economic, social, and cultural rights, which, as you all know, include a range of issues, including access to education, access to housing, and again is an important opportunity to elevate economic, social, and cultural rights, these human rights in the United States. It's also important to highlight that this review is different than the other reviews, that it is a peer review, and it also offers an opportunity to pressure the government to meet fully those obligations. The U.S. government report is due to the UN on January 19th, 2015, so the coming month. Just a little bit of background. The U.S. was first reviewed in 2010. The network coordinated groups' efforts to influence the review, which then culminated in a large report, as well as we also coordinated a summary submission. Both the compilation and the summary was submitted in April of 2010. This year, we submitted a summary submission, which included reports from more than 30 groups across the country, and it included a range of issues, including adequate access to housing, as well as a range of other issues. It is different than the first round than in 2010. This one coming in 2015, as the U.S. will have to report on recommendations that were made from the last review in terms of the actual timing. Although the UPR review takes place in terms of the actual timing of this particular UPR review, although the review takes place in May, we believe it's going to be around May 11th, although that's yet to be completely confirmed. We know that the Human Rights Council is meeting in March, and there's going to be a pre-session in April, and I'll let my colleagues get into that a little bit more. But I do, before I finish, want to talk about why the UPR review and using the international mechanisms is important. And I just want to say that using a human rights frame and using these opportunities to hold the U.S. accountable really gives our movement more power on the ground. Also working together across issues and across the nation to hold the U.S. accountable for its human rights obligations really helps build our movement in the United States. It allows us across issue, across the country, across groups to come together advocating for the United States to both respect and to protect human rights for all people. And so it's an important opportunity that we, again, use these frames, but also use this opportunity with the international mechanisms, particularly the UPR review coming up in 2015, to elevate the need for the United States to hold human rights, the need for us to hold the United States accountable for its human rights obligations, and again helps promote the need to protect and respect human rights in the United States. Thank you, Yolande.
Thanks so much, Tenjiwe. Next up, we have Mary Garish. Mary is a member of the Vermont Workers Center, where she has worked as a policy coordinator. Mary is also a co-chair of the UPR task force and a member of our ICCPR task force. And Mary also serves on the board of the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. Mary?
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is a really important time, and I'm hoping that as you go through this presentation, it will get you excited about participating in the UPR. And for those of you who don't know, the Vermont Workers Center is a very grassroots organization, and you actually can see a rally for healthcare is a human right on the screen at the Vermont State House in Montpelier. And that is, we are a workers center. One of our major campaigns is healthcare as a human right, and we have discussed this both at the UPR back in 2010 and at the ICCPR. And this UPR gives us an opportunity to go from the State House to the UN in Geneva, where we can lobby other countries to try and hold our government accountable, and then back again to our own country, where we can ask our representatives, both national and state, as well as the executive office and the administration, to protect and serve our human rights the way that they are meant to do. So if you're a grassroots group, or if you're not a grassroots group, you can participate in this process in a lot of different ways. But one is a one-page advocacy tool that we're talking about today. And this is a one sheet, just as it sounds like, could be front and back, could be one page. And the idea is to put your information into a format that you can easily use in lots of different ways, and particularly that you can easily use in giving to countries who might be interested in your issue area. And it's really important to not provide them with, at this point in time, a long legal brief, so to speak, but rather to keep it really simple. Our readers may or may not have proficiency in the English language, and in fact, we had great success at the ICCPR in providing a very plain language, straightforward document that didn't make them do a lot of work to understand our point or look up a lot of references. The use of quotes or visuals that will actually attract them and say, gee, this looks pretty interesting, I'd kind of like to read this. So a lot of people probably have questions, should I write a one-pager? And as you can see, the answer is a resounding yes. So if you're saying, gee, I didn't submit a report in September, should I write a one-pager? Yes. Gee, I've never engaged in UN advocacy before, should I write a one-pager? Yes. And if you're wondering whether you'll get any help from the task force and your working groups in writing that one-pager, the answer is a resounding yes. And for that purpose, we have designed a template of a one-pager, which you are free to use, or design your own as long as it contains the information it needs to contain. So what I'd like to do right now is to kind of walk through the template, which if you don't all have that already, it will be sent out to you immediately after this call. And the first section is section 1, and that's your issue and subtitle of the one-pager. It's kind of the what of the one-pager. I'm going to use the human right to health as an example in filling in this one-pager because that is what we submitted from the Vermont Workers Center a report on. And our basic position is that healthcare is not a commodity, our health is not for sale, and everyone in our country, whether they are a citizen or not, should have access to healthcare no matter what their economic status. And when you tell your story, you want to say what right was violated. So we want it to be simple and clear. And if your group is working on more than one right, and as you can imagine, being a workers center, we do have some workers' rights we're also working on. And so if and I'm sorry about this, I somehow the PowerPoint is switching by itself here. So I'm going to try and get back to where I was. And so if you are wondering whether you can submit more than one pager to your work group and for advocacy, the answer to that is also yes. So what you probably want to do in telling your story is to make a good title, and then maybe a catchy subtitle. In my instance, it would be The Human Right to Health, which is, in fact, the human right we're talking about. And then, health insurance is not health care, because our method of advocacy is to say that if health care is a human right, providing people with access to purchase health insurance does absolutely nothing for their actual right to health care. And also in Section 1, we want to say that health care is a public good, not a commodity and not a vehicle for insurance companies to profit by. And you can see that in our grassroots activities, we talk about this all the time. So the next section is Section 2, and that's the issue. And that is tell the story. So what the U.S. is saying in so many words, and did say in the last UPR, was we've got this under control because we passed this Affordable Care Act, and now everybody can buy health insurance. And our position is the U.S. says we all have health care, but people are still dying for lack of treatment. And some of those people actually have insurance and can't use it because of deductibles, copays, etc. And that letting people buy health insurance has nothing to do with actually giving them health care. And we want to make it clear that the Affordable Care Act does not provide health care, because without money, you don't get the health care, whether you have the health insurance or not. Section 3 of the template talks about what's happened so far in this. And we can use all different sources to put down here, and they can be very simple, such as I've listed here. You can go through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in our case, Article 25 talks about the human right to health. And you can also cite federal and state laws. In our case, it would be the ACA, and then Vermont's Act 48, which actually wants to provide universal publicly financed health care as a public good for all residents, but can't right now because of the ACA. Then we can look at the recommendations from the UPR in 2010, where there was a recommendation that said that the country should actually provide health care to all within its borders and not just citizens. And at the ICCPR, which was a more specialized treaty review recently, it's a ratify a treaty, there was a concluding observation that talked about providing access to health care for all regardless of citizenship. So all of these things combined are what we're going to be talking about to these countries, and we're going to talk to them about what actions the government has or hasn't taken in regard to those things. So we're going to tell them that the ACA was passed but doesn't allow us to access to health care, that Vermont passed an act that can't function without an ACA waiver, and that in almost everywhere, lack of citizenship still bars access to any kind of health insurance or health care, and that lots of states don't expand Medicaid under the ACA, so nobody gets the health care that the government acknowledges they're entitled to. So then we want to talk in Section 4 about the recommendations that we want these countries to make to the U.S. government when they all convene at the UN. And the recommendations are things that they will put in a formal manner and say, such and such a country recommends this. And in this case, in the last UPR, the recommendation was that the United States provide health care to all within its borders. So then the United States gets the opportunity to accept or reject or make reservations about its acceptance of those recommendations. Once they accept them, we can, in our advocacy, both on a local and a national level, and amongst ourselves as human rights advocates, try and hold them accountable for living up to those standards. So in this instance, we want to be very simple and concise, and we want to say that the U.S. did not follow the recommendation from the last UPR. They have not done anything about the ICCPR recommendation. And what we want them to do is to make the U.S. provide universal health care for every resident of the country. Everyone within its borders is the language that you used last time. So before they actually get to the recommendation part, each country gets to ask the U.S. questions, and that kind of gives the U.S. an opportunity. It kind of foreshadows what their recommendations might be. So what we want to do is we want to give each country a question that they can ask that will foreshadow a recommendation for universal health care. And in this case, I would like them to ask why states who want to provide universal care to their residents are not allowed to do so under federal law. And that will give the government the idea that there may be a recommendation coming on this. So when you're done with this whole one-pager and all the different sections, the really important thing is to know whether we've kept it simple. And being a retired attorney, I can tend to not keep things simple. So I think it's really helpful to have someone else read this, particularly someone who doesn't know a lot about your issue area specifics. And they might be able to give you input on whether they really understand what you want done here. And I would say, for me, if I got an answer saying, gee, I'm not sure what you mean by that, I would go rewrite it. And then you can use that one-page advocacy tool. You can use it in actions or protests. You can use it in community meetings. You can use it at your individual state house. You can use it at the UN, and you can use it in Washington, D.C. You can also use it to put together with other one-page advocacy tools that your allies have drafted in order to get this right heard. So please, the answer is yes, everybody should write a one-pager, whether you're new to UN procedures and the network or not. Plenty of people are willing to answer questions, and so I'm hoping that everybody on this call will not only write a one-pager, but will ask all of their allies and associates to do the same. And I'll turn it back to Yolande now to introduce my co-chair, Joshua Cooper.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that wonderful presentation. And in case you're just joining us, the key takeaway among many from Mary's presentation is that, yes, write a one-pager. And yes, there will be support to help guide you through that one-pager. And yes, the template will be available for you to use to write that one-pager. And that will be coming out after the call and available on our website. As well, if you're just joining us, be sure to use the chat on the left side of your screen to ask questions of our presenters, and you'll also have an opportunity at the end of the formal presentations to ask questions directly of them. Next up, we have Joshua Cooper. Josh is a lecturer at the University of Hawaii and the National Training Center for Teaching Peace and Human Rights in Geneva, Switzerland. He is also the UNA USA Human Rights Task Force on the task force and an area coordinator for Amnesty International in Hawaii. Josh is the director for the Four Freedoms Forum and the Hawaii Institute for Human Rights, and as it says here, one of the co-chairs of our UPR task force. And Josh will be talking to us about how we plan to use the one-pager in our advocacy as part of the UPR. Josh?
Aloha. It's great to be on the call and to participate with everyone. Everyone's doing an amazing amount of work, and I think Tenjiwe spoke about really what we're building here, and that's really the opportunity with the UPR. If you did participate in the ICCPR, if you did participate in CERD, and if you did participate in CAT, you can definitely participate and continue the important advocacy work that you've been doing. So exactly as Mary talked about, take it to the UN, but more importantly, bring it home to our community. And of course, the other aspect that's quite important, if you haven't done anything with the UPR and you're brand new to the Human Rights Network and you really know that there's important issues in your community and you want to use the leverage of the international, we also want to make it quite simple so that you can use the international to put pressure to be able to make sure that the situation change on the streets where we live and to make sure that human rights is a reality. And the Universal Periodic Review is really one of the greatest opportunities to get involved. And as Mary said, it's definitely a yes, yes, yes opportunity. It's yes that we can begin to participate, yes that everyone should participate, and yes, hopefully after this everyone will participate in this process. And the one-pager is really the most simple step, but it'll lead to a lot of different ways that you can use this for advocacy. So the first thing is there's really 5 phases with the UPR, and we're only in the second one. The first phase was preparation. And if you did do a 5-pager or if you were involved in a working group, then you did create a 5 or a 10-pager. And what you're doing in that case is bringing it down to the 1-pager that Mary had described. And if you haven't been participating in the working group, I would say this is a great time to look at the list of working groups and really use that as your coordination committee, as your group that you can share ideas with, that you can brainstorm with, and that you can bring your issue forward through the working group to the United Nations and then back home. And what we're going to be looking at now is just the second phase, which is interaction. The interaction is when we take this one-pager to really begin to engage with government. So for people who have been participating in the treaty bodies, we're always looking at how many experts there are. And usually it's 18 experts, and with CAT there were only 10, and then there were only 8 because 2 had connections to the United States. So have no fear though, with the UPR, you have 190 plus different states that you can talk with, that you can then bring your issue forward to. So we don't have to worry about crowding and talking to just so few people. This is a great opportunity for everyone to be able to speak and connect with these other 190 missions or embassies and be able to bring our issue forward to the global level. What's also really important in this interaction phase is to think about what the UPR is. It's more expansive than any of the other processes we've been participating in. For all the other processes, you can look at just the article that's in those treaties. If it's not in that treaty and it's not in a general comment, you can't really address the issue. Here with the UPR, anything in the UN Charter that came out of San Francisco in 45 can be used. Other important thing, especially just one day after the commemoration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, anything in the UDHR. And what's really important is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from Article 22 to really 28 is about economic, social, and cultural rights. So this is really our one chance, since we haven't ratified the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, to bring our issue forward. And Erica's going to give a great example of that afterwards about housing. But this is our chance to bring in the issues that we know are so important in the United States right now regarding economic, social, and cultural rights. And through working in your working group, you'll be able to bring those forward. And that really gets us to where we're at now. Starting in January, we're going to be coordinating opportunities for you to get your one-pagers into the hands of the governments that care about your issues. One thing we can look at, and you can do this in your working group or on your own, is you can look at a website called UPR Info. UPR Info, if you type in what countries ask questions about your issues, you get a long list. Says this, if you're working on women's rights, Norway always asks good questions, and that'd be definitely the country to give your one-pager to. If you're looking at indigenous rights, it's really important to get it to Mexico and Guatemala. So it's a really easy tool, and I'll help work with anyone that wants to look that up, or you can work through your working group. But that's the really important part, is matching up your issue with the country. The first opportunity we'll have will be in January. In January, I'll be going to a UPR session, and I'll be going there to help another country look at their human rights issues. But if you get your one-pager to me, I will then pass it out to one of the countries that you've indicated and let them know that we'll follow up with them. But this is just an important issue, and we know it's a little early, but we want to begin the dialogue to work together. Another thing that we'll look at that we've done in the past is we might have a side event, and you'd be able to speak for a couple of minutes via Skype to the governments that be in the room. So this is just the first opportunity in Geneva that we'll be starting. And then, of course, what we'll have next is around the Human Rights Council session in March. We'll also organize to be able to take more one-pagers. If you weren't able to complete yours by then, we'll then hand that out and give it to the different missions there in Geneva. This will all be preparation before the May 11th session that Tinjue pointed out, and that looks like that will be the day on that Monday. The other important thing, though, that's quite important is we also have the emails of every mission in Geneva. So we can also help you send it directly there if you don't get it to us in time in January, and if you'd like to do it at another time. Another thing that we'll be coordinating, though, that allows people to participate directly is in New York City and Washington, D.C. Most times with UPR, governments gather information from the capital and send it to Geneva so that they can include it in their UPR question and recommendations that they make. What's really important to look at and what we're talking about is that people can actually make sure that they can speak, and we're able to organize twice. We're able to organize in Washington, D.C. because that's where all the embassies are located. But since the UN headquarters is in New York City, we can organize there. So we thought we'd give opportunities for people to participate. And we're coming up with dates towards the end of January, end of February, March, and April that will then have that opportunity based on themes to be able to raise these issues to these countries. And another thing that Mary was talking about in her information is really simple of your issue, your question, and your recommendation. Because what we'll be doing with these one-pagers is we'll give them to the countries, and after we give them to the countries, our goal will be then in May that during the 3.5-hour review of the United States, your question and your recommendation will be made, and that will then give you the leverage, as Mary pointed out, to be able to bring it back to the White House, to Congress, and then, of course, to our state capitals to push for change in policy and practices and laws in our communities and improve and recognize human rights. So that's just a short overview of what we'll be doing with the one-pagers. But the one-pagers are really making a simple introduction to your issue, and we'll be getting them to the states, because what's really important is the states will be the ones that will ask the questions and make the recommendations. And many states want to ask questions, and very difficult questions, to the United States regarding their human rights record. So we'll work with you, one, through the task force overall. You can always contact Mary and myself, but also through the working groups to be able to make sure that we're able to get your questions and recommendations that are included on your one-pager to the best government that has indicated an interest in your issue. And then we'll be able to organize with you, and we'll get into some of the strategies of what we'll be doing as well after Eric's great presentation. Mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. And all of what Josh has talked about will be available both in terms of the work plan that we'll be sharing with you all later this week, a UPR fact sheet, which is available on our website, and I've placed a link in the chat box if you see that there, as well as this audio itself will also be available after the call. So next we have Eric Tars, who will be talking about how to lobby for the UPR. Eric serves as a National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty's senior attorney, focusing on human rights and children's rights programs. In his human rights capacity, he works with homelessness and housing advocacy organizations to train and strategically utilize human rights as a component of their work. In his youth rights capacity, he works to protect homeless students' right to education and advocates for homeless youth and families through trainings, litigation, and policy advocacy at the national and local levels. Eric is also a member of our UPR task force. Eric?
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I'm just going to present briefly on kind of our advocacy strategy, how we have been using these tools that people have been talking about already today as we've been building up to the UPR this coming May. And just as a real basic roadmap of where I'm going to talk a little bit about research, about the one-pager itself, and show our example of that, how we've requested meetings, how we go into those meetings with governments, and then how we follow up. It's very simple, nothing, no rocket science here, but we have some effective tips that we hope we can share. So first, as Josh was mentioning, the UPR info website, which is upr-info.org, has this fantastic research tool where you can search by your issues, by keywords, and you can look at what countries have made recommendations or asked questions about your issues. So I've gone to this website and looked up, as you can see, the right to housing, and got a list of countries that have made recommendations, and you can see what those recommendations are, who they're making recommendations to, whether or not the country had accepted that. So it's a great tool. And so, for example, for our issue, we found Morocco had made 3 recommendations relating to the right to housing, and in fact, we knew Morocco and Norway as 2 of the lead states because they made specific recommendations to the U.S. on our housing issues during the last UPR. So Morocco and Norway are 2 of our targets. Malaysia is also a target state for us. They've made a lot of recommendations on housing issues, and in our case, we were able to even determine specifically that they had told Canada, another major Western country, another major donor country, to address homelessness in their country. And that's another thing to take into account, that the UPR process is a political process. The countries that are making these recommendations are, are representing their own country's interests. And so even though we'd like to think that it's a kind of neutral process all about the human rights, in reality, some of the smaller countries might not be willing to take a hard hit at the U.S., who's a major donor nation who has a lot of sway at the UN on some major issues. But if your issue is a niche issue, maybe they would be willing to go out on a limb on it. And so the research can help tell you who's already interested in your issue and who's willing to stand up to some of the bigger countries on those issues, and how they might do that, what kind of recommendations they might be willing to make. So having done that research, we produced a template one-pager that we will be modifying as we go into meetings with each of these countries. We've got the, you can see we took into account some of the tips that Mary was sharing earlier. We have a very clear kind of topic paragraph saying, laying out exactly the issue that we're talking about. We've got some quotes from directly affected individuals and other UN sources, and a catchy picture on the left side. And then we go through, the way we've done it now is we've actually broken down the issue by the recommendations that were the U.S. accepted during their last Universal Periodic Review, and we comment specifically on these are things that the U.S. has done, these are the things the U.S. hasn't done. At the moment, this is still our draft one-pager. We haven't come up with any questions we want other countries to ask yet, but we do have suggested recommendations. And that's a minor point, but a significant one to note going into the review process. Countries can ask questions to the U.S., and they can also make recommendations. But the U.S. is only required to affirmatively accept or reject the recommendations that are made. They don't have to necessarily answer the questions, and although the questions will be made part of the official record of the dialogue, questions are slightly less powerful, less easy tool to use in terms of promoting accountability to the U.S. So always you want to kind of try and suggest that the country make a recommendation as opposed to ask a question. But if it's an issue where they might be, on the fence about raising, then you can always say, well, you just raise a question about it, and that's slightly less of a commitment for them. But this is, we don't claim that this is the best or the only model to go with, but it's something that we've been working with. And within this, so this is our general template. We may also take some of the research that we've done and go even more specific. So at the beginning of the one-pager, say, in 2010, Norway raised this issue with the U.S. Here's what's happened in the past 4 years since the last review. So you can take it down to that level if you want to. The next step in the process is just to request the meeting. There's, again, no rocket science here. We just looked up on the web, found the human rights officers. When I was going to Geneva for the Committee Against Torture review last month, I tried to set up some meetings to lobby a couple of key countries ahead of time. And so we just looked up the human rights officers at the UN mission in Geneva and sent them an email saying, that the review is coming up. Your country made an excellent recommendation that we thank you for during the last review. We might want to let you know about some of the updates, and here's a link to our broader report on the issue, and then let's try and schedule a meeting. It's not rocket science, and it's very straightforward. Most of these countries, people are very willing to meet with you. It's not shouldn't be an intimidating process. All of the embassy staff are usually friendly and happy to have a conversation. So don't be afraid just to ask. And if you can't make it to Geneva, if you can't make it to DC, if you can't make it to New York for any of these other consultations, you can just ask to have a phone conversation. This should be something that's very accessible to anybody. There's no reason to let distance or lack of resources be a barrier. If you want your issue raised in Geneva next May, all you have to do is send an email, say, here's my issue, here's my one-pager, and do you want to have a phone call about it? And 9 times out of 10, you will probably get a yes, we'll be happy to talk, and you can try and do your best lobbying by phone. So the process should be accessible. In going into your meeting, know your research, so be able to cite to any of those recommendations. Refresh yourself right before you go in so that you can link the recommendations and things that countries have already said to your issues and say, look, you're not going on out a limb by talking about these things. You've already made these kinds of comments in the past. Know your specific target. If you've found out who you'll be meeting with at the embassy, as I did when I was going into my meeting with the Norway embassy in Geneva, I looked up the specific people who I would be meeting with and tried to find out any information about them if they had any specific issues that they were interested in, that they had written about. Just Google them and see what you can find out about them. Know your priority and fallback ask. So go, like I said before, go in, you want everything, you want a recommendation on this issue, but if they seem hesitant on the issue, maybe what's another issue that could be a slightly softer ask for them, or, suggest a question as opposed to a recommendation. But know what you want them to do before you go in so that you can make sure that you're very clear on that as you have your conversation. And then ask about their process for determining their questions. Some of the countries, as Joshua said, have their recommendations and questions largely determined by the home office in the home country. Some of them let the embassies in the U.S. lead the process for the U.S. So because they are closer to the ground, closer to the issues that are going on in the U.S., they take guidance from the U.S. embassy, and some let the missions in Geneva lead the process. So, for example, Norway, they told me that they really do take the lead from their U.S. embassies. So in addition to having met with them, I'm now going to schedule a follow-up meeting with some of the embassy staff in D.C. because I know I want them to be familiar with my issue so that it can be sent back to Geneva. So ask about that process and find out if there's any other way, if any other people within their mission, either on either side of the Atlantic, who you should be talking to. And last, follow up with them, say thank you for meeting. If you have any more need for information, I'll be happy to provide it. I offered to meet again if I came back to Geneva in the spring. So, just close that loop with them, establish more firmly the relationship, and see where it can take you. And last but not least, I did want to mention our report, Human Rights to Human Reality, that we came out with just yesterday. It's available on our website. But this is a larger guide on strategic human rights advocacy that talks about not just the kind of nuts and bolts of this advocacy, but how it fits into a larger campaign, how you can use it to create actual change on the ground in your community in the U.S. and how to make these processes not just something that takes place in Geneva, but that is affecting change here in the U.S. So please check out our website and download that report if you are interested. So with that, my contact information if anybody has any questions, and I'll be happy to take questions after the presentation as well.
Thank you so much, Eric. And just in terms of a time check, we have 10 more minutes. I don't know that we're going to get to hear questions and answer them before we finish the presentation. So if you have to leave us at the hour mark, please send your questions to us via the chat, and I'll be sure to have our presenters answer those, and then you can get the answers to those after I send out the recording and the PowerPoint and other resources after the call. So next, and then we just have 2 more sections before we complete. Next, we'll have Rob Robinson, who will be talking about the effectiveness of the UPR process in supporting human rights organizing, followed by some other ways that you can engage in the UPR process outside of using this one-page advocacy tool, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Rob Robinson is a member of the leadership committee of the Take Back the Land movement and a staff volunteer at the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. After losing his job in 2001, Rob spent 2 years homeless on the streets of Miami and 10 months in a New York City shelter. He eventually overcame homelessness and has risen to become a leading figure in the domestic and international human rights movement since 2007. So, Rob?
Thank you, Yolanda. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the predecessors in this webinar. Many of those folks that you heard speaking earlier are folks that have mentored me in this process, and international human rights process, and getting the support of the network has been incredible. So to Yolanda and all the other folks on the call, I just wanted to give a big shout out and say thank you publicly. I think it's always cool to do that as you proceed through this work. I'm going to be real quick as I proceed through this and talking about how this work has been impacted with grassroots organizations on the ground. The Universal Periodic Review allows for participation of grassroots communities in UN mechanisms. Often, many grassroots communities and activists and organizers don't know a way to get into this process. While they believe that the human rights frame is a valuable frame in their work, many folks don't know how to interact with those particular mechanisms. And it's a way to empower directly impacted people that are impacted by economic, cultural, and social rights issues to advocate on behalf of those directly impacted people in the U.S. For me personally, in 2010, I was a member of a couple of teams that did some pre-visits. You heard some of the presenters earlier talk about those initial visits prior to the actual Universal Periodic Review, and it was a way for me to meet delegates from different countries, interact with those delegates, and start to dialogue and have important questions. Another very important thing that happened through that process was meeting the Civil Society Office of the High Commission of Human Rights. And that's an office that some 4 or 5 years later today that I still interact with on a regular basis and connect grassroots communities to. So the UPR was a way for us to not only achieve our goals, but understand the process. You heard Eric and some other folks talk about the website that provided very rich and valuable information. UPR-info.org is valuable in many ways. And again, there are downloadable PDFs. I think also the Office of Civil Society has mailed me tools like videos, pamphlets, books, and printed materials that I've been fortunate enough to be able to distribute to grassroots communities around the country. I spoke a little bit earlier about the interaction with delegates and representatives. This was powerful, right? The network facilitated many of those meetings, but for me as a grassroots organizer, to be able to have a conversation with folks directly from countries that I knew would probably challenge the U.S. Once you have them understand the issues that you're facing, the social, economic, and cultural issues that you're facing in this country, you bring them directly to some of those delegates, and the delegates get a better understanding. And then that was being presented before the delegates once the UPR happened in November of 2010, the initial UPR. They laid the groundwork to challenge the U.S. in a real way, and the U.S. had to respond once that happened. So we found that process very empowering to grassroots communities. Having gone through this process and interacted with rapporteurs in some of these mechanisms in the past, allowed me to connect with grassroots communities like in Detroit. Over the summer, folks in Detroit were wondering how they could get the UN to come to Detroit. And having the connections in the High Commissioner's office in Geneva, I was able to share that information with folks in Detroit, and it was as simple as writing a letter. Eric told you it's so easy to contact these folks if you try. It was a letter, and folks were surprised in Detroit when they got a positive response to the letter. You see a photo now of Katerina de Albuquerque, who was the rapporteur on the human right to water and safe sanitation. Came for a visit that was very powerful. She was joined by Leilani Farha, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. That visit proved very powerful, and this weekend I'll be in Virginia to follow up on that with some folks in West Virginia and folks from Detroit to have a bigger conversation on how we move that issue forward through the UN and into this UPR process. So you'll be hearing more about that. Finally, I think as you understand this process and the grassroots communities are connected to it, the Take Back the Land movement, of which I've been proud to be a part of for a number of years, has always used the human rights frame to advance the human right to housing in the U.S. It became a reality in Rochester, New York, as we used that framing to elevate the fight of Catherine Lennon, a woman who was evicted from her home by Bank of America. We challenged Bank of America very publicly using human rights language, went into a courtroom in Rochester, New York, and spoke very passionately and eloquently about the human right to housing and what it means and what this country's obligations were, forcing Bank of America to take a step back and figure out how they were going to challenge us, right? So as Catherine was evicted from her home and we took it back, we used this language, and eventually on November 15th of last year, Bank of America entered into an agreement to give that house back to Catherine Lennon and her family for the price of $1, no longer a mortgage. And that's because we use that language, that particular language. A bank doesn't have the right to profit off of a home when a home is there to meet the needs of individuals within a community. So it was an incredible experience for me participating in this process and being mentored by many, as I said, of the people that spoke before me on this call, and being supported by the U.S. Human Rights Network. And I look forward to moving into the second time the U.S. goes before this process and seeing what I can do to move this further into the grassroots communities and connect folks on the ground in this process. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's a really inspiring example of how you've been able to use this process and these standards to demand actual change in individual lives, but also in a broader movement. So we are going to move into the final phase of the presentation and to hear from Mary and Josh, our co-chairs of the UPR task force, about some more ways you can participate in this process if for whatever reason, the one-pager is not your particular cup of tea, for example. So, Josh and Mary.
Aloha again. It's great to be back on. And I'll just give you a couple of different ways that you can participate at three different levels: at the grassroots community, at the national level, and then at the global level. And so it is true, not everyone loves writing and doing reports, but what's really important is what we're trying to create here is really having the results that Rob talked about, and we can see lots of those things happening with the previous UPR. And really, the UPR is really uniting people for rights. It brings people together, and what's really important is this is really our opportunity to educate everyone in our community about what our rights are, and then organizing with direct action and diplomacy to demand those rights. And so at the community level, it's really our chance now to be able to say, do you know what your rights are? Do you know what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is? Do you know what other governments have said in the past? Do you know what rapporteurs have said? And say, these are our rights, let's demand them together. So what we're going to talk about, some social media things. What we're going to do is have 3 campaigns. The first one's going to be January 15th to February 15th, and that's going to be a little Marvin Gaye, what's going on? And what we'll have people do is just make short videos that look at an issue related to any article of the UDHR or any of the other treaty bodies that the U.S. has gone before, and just shoot it on their video camera or on their phone about what they see happening. And we've done that in the past with the Testify Project, and it really got a lot of people taking videos and talking, and that's really what we need to do, is generate awareness around the UPR and around people's rights. And then in February, still at the grassroots community level, it's going to be what you're going to do. And that's where people get to ask questions to our elected officials, either mayors, because the government will usually include a mayor or an attorney general from a state, or a governor, and say what you're going to do, asking the officials what they're going to do about these issues that you've raised in the first phase. And that'll be until February 15th to March 15th. And the last one is going to be what we want. And that's really the important part, too, about this whole UPR process. We're moving beyond in the human rights world from shaming and naming to really claiming and framing and claiming our rights. We're moving on the naming and shaming to really framing and claiming our rights and demanding those rights. And it's what do we want? What's the recommendation that'll change the situation to improve what's going on our streets and our state, and what we hope in the United States of America and larger whole. So those 3 little videos that are be able to be made will just get on social media and be able to share it with people about what the issues are, what questions we want asked to our government, and what's the recommendations that we know that'll really claim and frame the human rights issues we want. And then the other side is at the national level, what we're talking about in New York and DC. New York and DC will have those UPR diplomacy dialogues with those missions and embassies, and we'll invite people to come and speak and share with those missions, their questions and recommendations. And we'll also have a table where we'll pass out everyone's questions and recommendations. And that'll be really important. We'll do those once a month beginning in January. And then finally, at the global level, as I shared in Geneva, I'll take your one-pagers and pass them out. Eric also pointed out you can send them anytime yourself. And we'll also have a side event as well in January where people will be able to call in. In March at the Human Rights Council, those meetings that Rob talked about with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, we'll have many of those as well to be able to share with them the issues and talk. But more importantly, meet with the governments and have a side event where we're able to share some of the videos, but the one-pagers so that they know exactly what we want them to speak and say on our behalf. And then finally, of course, in May, it's important. Many people always want to go because they want to see the U.S. government get grilled. We'll have side events there, as we've had in the past. We'll have meetings with the High Commission for Human Rights offices and the rapporteurs that will do follow-up. But we'll also probably have a town hall meeting where we'll be able to allow everyone to be able to also participate directly with the government. That's happened in the past in a meeting, but also for people to be able to call in. So it'll be a dynamic time from January until May. And then, of course, there's the adoption in September. So what we'll try to do in the summer is really maintain the momentum. All the hard work we're doing from now, from Human Rights Day until September, is to make sure that there's pressure on the U.S. to accept the recommendations, as Eric pointed out. So what we're going to do is put pressure between May through September to make sure that the U.S. accepts these recommendations, and that other things that they like to do is say they'll do something. So what we also can strategize together is what's a simple step, a low-hanging fruit that we can make the U.S. government pull and do before September to say they're actually trying to do some of the things they promised. So it's really exciting to engage with everyone, over 40 people still on the line, and we look forward to work with everyone. And you can email us and communicate with us, and we look forward to coordinate together. And I think Mary might add a little bit, but we just wanted to be short so that we have enough time for question and discussion so we can organize together.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you to everybody on this call, for all my colleagues, for your great information. And I hope that we'll have many, many more colleagues after this call. And I'd just like to say that we all know that our human rights are interdependent, and we all would like to envision a society in which everything is human rights oriented, that our human rights are grounded in law, that we teach human rights in school curriculums, and where everybody can live a life of dignity. And in order to accomplish that, we all have to come together and raise our voices as loudly as possible, because we know that a few voices here and there aren't going to do it. But if we have an overwhelming thunder of voices to demand our human rights, I think we can do it. And I hope you'll all join us in helping to raise that thunderous voice. So I'm going to stop there so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to go ahead now and take questions. Again, two ways you can participate in the question and answer session. That's to use the chat on your left to type questions that I will ask of our presenters. And you can also participate by using the raise hand feature, which is in the top menu under Mood. If you go down and click on raise hand, then it will recognize you to ask your question. So while we wait for folks to raise their hand, I wanted to go ahead and put to the panel a question that was raised by the Center for Reproductive Rights, and specifically, can you talk or share some details about the diplomacy meetings in D.C. and New York? So Josh or Mary?
Sure. What we're doing is finalizing the dates, but we've talked with at least 5 different schools in New York and D.C. that have agreed to host the meeting. And the idea behind it is something we did last time in the UPR cycle. And what we did once is we had a meeting at American University that was around from 9 to noon, and we had a handful of people speak about the important issues. And we thought that was very good, but it was too small. So what we wanted to do was to organize to put our voice out there a lot better and to involve more people. So I've already been able to speak with government in Geneva and in DC, New York, and tell them that we're planning this. And they said they're very interested to attend. And what we're going to do is in January, in February, in March, and in April, what will happen is based on the themes of the working groups, people will be able to briefly present their issue, but more importantly, the governments that will be speaking in Geneva in May will be able to ask questions so that they can refine their questions and recommendations. And one thing we can think of, and Eric's slides were great, is in our recommendations as specific as possible to kind of use that SMART example of specific, measurable, action-oriented, and a timetable, and we'll get our information to them. So the idea of the UPR diplomacy dialogues will be that happening in the morning from 9 to noon. And then we're also going to aim, if possible, to have a country consultation, inviting the government to those as well. We thought they might want to hear what we said to other governments, but then that would set up a communication that's a lot better than the previous consultations where we'd find out a week before. So we're looking before the end of the year to be able to provide the 4 dates, the January, February, March, and April, so that people can participate in the diplomacy dialogues and country consultations. And then, of course, the final meeting would take place in Geneva at the UPR consultation, the actual 3.5-hour review. And one thing we didn't say is we also want to make sure everybody organizes viewing parties, because it'll be a live webcast. So we can actually have our communities that fed in all the information through the videos, the social media campaign in their one-pagers. They can actually watch exactly and see their questions and recommendations be made.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And we have a question from Sausan. Can you go ahead and ask your question? Sausan, you've been unmuted. Would you like to ask your question? Okay. So instead, I'm going to ask your questions. I see it posted here in the chat, which is the first question is, can you elaborate more on the idea of the task force? How often do you coordinate, and how do you find funding for your task force? Mary, you said you wanted to answer that.
Yes, sure. I'd be happy to. The task force is selected through an application process, and there is a selection committee. And all of the task force are volunteers. We are currently meeting by conference call once every 2 weeks. We also have met at various government consultations and that sort of thing. So relative to funding for the task force, we really don't have or need any funding for the task force per se. Now, the task force is the broad overall group that is working on the UPR, and also involved in that is that each task force member is involved in either one or more working groups, and the working groups will also meet separately through conference calls to exchange information, sometimes delegate tasks. They might come up with a joint one-pager if the working group all has the same issue approach. And so I hope that answers the question about the task force for everybody.
Thanks so much, Mary. And just to elaborate on that, which is the task force that Mary and Josh are co-chairs of and that Eric is a member of, is an entity of the U.S. Human Rights Network. So the funding for the task force comes through the network. If you're asking because you're interested in supporting our work, then we would gladly take a donation, and that you could do that in our website or email us, and we can send you a direct link. But the funding for the task force comes specifically through the network. In addition to what Mary has said, and this is a group of volunteers who do this in addition to their paid work. We have one more question, and it says, can you guys let me know when the working group meets? Sorry, I missed the question. the question before that is, do you use the UPR for specifically social and economic rights? And do you recommend to leave political and civil rights to the ICCPR process? And this is a really important and critical question. So, Josh, did you want to add to that? And if anyone else wanted to add to anything that Josh says, then go ahead.
Absolutely. What's really important is we prioritize economic, social, and cultural rights during the UPR because it's really our only chance to really directly put pressure on the U.S. on economic, social, and cultural rights. But, as I said earlier, you can actually use anything in the UN Charter, anything in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, anything that any of the treaty bodies have made recommendations to the United States, including ICCPR and the Human Rights Committee, as well as anything a special rapporteur has said. And of course, with everything coming out with torture, the interesting thing about the UPR, it's also international humanitarian law as well. So the UPR, even though I really do consider it the uniting people for rights, because normally with the treaty bodies, only specific groups really focus on specific treaties, but this allows for the entire civil society in the country to stand up together and demand our rights, and also to recognize the interconnectedness of all of our rights. So we encourage economic, social, and cultural rights because we can't really bring it all the time directly. We have to work it into a specific article of one of the treaties and to raise it that way. But if you were on the ICCPR, the Human Rights Committee work, this is also another chance that if you didn't feel you got a response yet to the U.S. government and you were either in ICCPR or CERT or CAT, this is your chance to once again put pressure on the government, maybe change your recommendations you came up with or put pressure in a new way, or a new issue came up or your issue has emerged in new ways. So it's a great way to continue the work you've already started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh. And we have a question about the working group. Can any one of the task force members, Eric, Josh, Mary, say briefly, how the working groups function and how folks can sign up to be a part of those, or even support by being a co-chair on one of the working groups?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. The working groups, you can find a list of the working groups on the Human Rights Network website, and I think that was actually just posted by Rebecca in the chat box. And the working groups are sort of separate entities, although there are task force members on each of the working groups. And so they will decide for themselves what meeting times they want, what work product or work assignments they want to give out. And I want to say that whether you have a lot of time or a little of time, it's great to join a working group, because that does not mean that you are going to be given an assignment necessarily. It can be as casual as that you want to join the working group calls because you want to know what other people are doing in your issue area. You might want to sign on to one or more of their documents if you don't have the time or resources to write one yourself. So I would like to encourage everybody to sign up for working groups. There is not a specific time that all work groups meet. It's up to them because it's designed to be flexible so that it allows for the schedules of the people in that group. I hope that helps to explain it, but if not, somebody please let me know.
Josh or Eric, did you want to add anything to what Mary's shared?
I'm good.
No, I think that covers it.
Awesome, thank you. So we have another question, and Eric, I'm going to throw this one to you, which is, how does lobbying for a specific issue balance with the overall working group? For example, legal child labor versus children's rights in general.
So I think what people have tried to do with the working group is to, it's a functional thing. It's as functional as you want to make it. So if, in general, we are encouraging consolidation of issues within an overall framework, just to make sure that people are coordinated who may have overlapping issues, but you can certainly continue to represent your own specific interests within that working group, or if you know that you've got like 15 people who all would want to be participating just on this one issue, then of course you could probably form your own working group or sub-working group out of that. There's no specific limitations on it. It's much more what's the most effective functioning sort of thing. So even if the working group, for example, within the housing working group, we've raised housing issues from housing discrimination, housing affordability, criminalization of homelessness is my organization's current priority push. And so when I am advocating, I will have both a general one-pager on all the housing issues because I'm kind of the leader of the working group, but I will also have a specific one-pager on the criminalization issues we're trying to advocate for. And depending on which country we're advocating with, I may try and emphasize one versus the other. And I think the importance of trying to work within a larger working group is that you can be using that process to educate your fellow working group members about your issue, get them to make your issue their issue as well, but then, and obviously to be reciprocal about it, to help elevate all of the intersecting issues, because obviously none of the issues that we work on exist in a vacuum, and all of the issues are interconnected. I think that's the advantage of working in a broader working group, is to connect your specific issues to the broader concerns. But then in terms of the lobbying itself, it should be as functional as it can be, either representing just your own specific issue or representing the broader array of issues within your working group or even beyond your working group.
Wonderful, thank you. So a question, which is, let's say that I'm someone who has experienced a human rights violation as an issue, and I've been going through the courts and all these other processes for some time now, and have seen no results. And I want to participate in this process, but I have no idea where to start. Mary or Josh, what would be sort of the top 2 recommendations you would make to me about getting started?
I would say that the first thing to do would be to join the UPR listserv, which can be done on the U.S. Human Rights Network website, and also to join a working group. I would be happy if anybody would send an email to myself, Josh, Eric, any of the other task force members, and maybe we can have a brief chat on the phone to find out what your questions are, what your level of comfort is, and how we can help you feel comfortable in this process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Josh, what are you going to add?
What's really just a little thing that, you just also could look at which working group you believe your issue would fall under, and then you can talk with the current chair and share your information as well. And I agree with Mary. You could call any of us, and we could map out what are some of the possibilities to bring your issue forward.
Awesome. And what if I'm not already on a working group and I would like to join or become a co-chair? Who should I contact, and how do I go about doing that?
If you would like to become a co-chair of a working group, please feel free to call or email me or Josh, or if you know another task force member and you are comfortable calling them. But please let us know. We would love to have more co-chairs of working groups.
Thank you all. I don't see any hands raised or any questions in our chat, so we're going to go ahead and wind down and end the call. So just to reiterate some key things that were discussed today, which is if you did not write a report and submit one in September, you can still participate in this process. If you are interested in knowing how to translate your 5-page into a 2-page, we have a template, and we're encouraging you to write that 1-pager, which is a 2-sided document for continuing engagement. If you're not interested in writing a 1-pager, are there other ways you can participate? Yes, yes, and yes. And Josh went over 5 of those ways, and then we will have it on our work plan available. If you have participated in the treaty review and you've addressed civil and political rights issue and you want to continue forward in terms of getting another bite at the apple to address the issue, yes, civil and political rights, in addition to economic, social, and cultural rights, are issues that you can address as part of the UPR and are welcomed as part of the UPR. If you cannot make it to Geneva because of funds or whatever reason, yes, there are opportunities for you to engage in the U.S. with other representatives of the UN, or also through social media and other grassroots groups and other human rights activists working on the ground. So the question is, should I participate in the UPR process? The answer is yes, 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 and yes. And if you have any questions about how to get started on that, again, Mary and Josh have offered themselves as resources. The task force is here as a resource. The network is here as a resource. And simply you can email us at upr@ushrnetwork.org about anything related to anything we've talked about on this call or related to the human rights reporting process and the UPR generally. And you can learn more about the network by visiting us at ushrnetwork.org. Again, per the recommendations in this call, join the UPR listserv. It's the best, easiest, and fastest way to get updates related to this process. If you want to learn more beyond what we've discussed today, visit our UPR project page. Much of what's been discussed is already there, and if something's talked about that's not yet there, it is forthcoming. And again, email us at upr@ushrnetwork.org with your UPR-related concerns and questions. And lastly, consider becoming a member of the U.S. Human Rights Network by joining the movement on our website. Thank you all for taking the time and spending an hour and a half with us on this call. And thank you to our presenters for a fabulous job and an inspiring set of examples and ways to get started in this really important process. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Aloha.